Ashik, hi, good to have you with us. How have you been?
Yeah, I've been great. Thanks a lot for having me today.
It's a pleasure to have you with us, Ashik. And I've been looking forward to this conversation. That's largely because, what we've seen in the last 2.5 years, right? As an economy,
Right,
we've shifted gears, right? Who imagined, for a society and for an economy which is so, fragmented at many levels. We're going to become information first. We're going to become data first, right? And future essentially is going to be led by data, uh,
absolutely.
right? And the sensibility that you make out of that data. Data has existed for us. Structured, unstructured, but I think the sensibility that you make with that guiding force and the guiding power is going to be very, very important. Thus, this becomes a very important and interesting conversation at many levels. Before we do that, I'd love you to give us a quick round of a background to yourself,
So,
and
yeah,
we dive into
sure. Hi, this is Aisik. What I do at Data Sutram is I'm the CTO and co-founder at Data Sutram. We started this, I think, fresh out of college almost 3 years back and raised more than 2, 3 rounds right now. So the idea is that we, as college graduates, we wanted to always work with data science, and we always had a huge roadblock when it comes to data and accessibility to data, right? And that's where we came up on this entire concept where we wanted to make data something that is a lot more simplified, data that is a lot more accessible, and data that is a lot more understood and more relevant when it comes to use cases. So
Interesting.
that has been our journey for the last 3 years.
That's a lot of stuff that you talk about, right? I mean, I think
Yeah,
and we're gonna through the course of conversation, we're gonna start understanding that more, dissecting that a little more, right? To understand what you're doing, right? Ashik,
right.
my first question in this conversation, right? What's the construct of data system? How do you position yourself, right? Now, when I look at all the information which is available around you, right? Essentially, what the way it comes to is that you're tracking a bunch of sources, 250 of them, 300 of them, right? And then there is data that you're bringing together. You're synthesizing that data, which essentially means you're helping data interact, and these silo-based points interact with each other, and then giving certain actionable insights, right? Which is too very, very important, right? That's my
Right.
larger understanding, right? I'd
Yeah.
love you to explain this to us in a slightly more detail.
So I think like you started off in your conversation, right? Like data has been there for a long time. Uh, Data has not been relevant for a long time as well, right? So at the end of the day, we work with information and not data. No business can work with data. Businesses work and act on information, and that's kind of the journey that we are looking at here. What we are trying to do is we are in a space called alternate data where we have all these sources, partners tapped onto, and at our end, what we are doing is we are collating, aggregating all of that,
Mhm.
creating context around it more importantly, so that when it goes to a business, it's in terms of an insight and not pure raw data, right? And that's a journey that I think every data scientist that you talk to in any large MNC, 90% of their entire effort goes into just processing data, pulling it out from sources and converting them to a format that can be modeled upon. The data science and the modeling part becomes a very small aspect of their job. So that's the part where we come in, where we have scaled across India and international geographies, pulling in data from external data sources, pulling in data from data partners, and trying to build a lot of insights that can be directly used by businesses in terms of how consumers and people behave in any particular geography, right? And I think in terms of being data driven is a huge part of any company story now, and that has I think historically only been possible for a large MNC who's been here for 20, 30 years and has generated enough data for them to actually build insights or intelligence on. Today, what we can do is for any company that probably has started off a year back, provide the same strength when it comes to data and insights, and provide them a backbone when it comes to building business insights internally within the company. They don't need to have their own data. They can use the data that we have generated, that we have verified, that we have created, and build
Sure.
context around and
Very
directly
interesting.
start using it.
Very interesting. Ashu, I'd love you to explain this to us a little more deeply, right? Possibly with a case study, right?
Sure.
My understanding is, when you're looking at data, when you're looking at multiple sources of data, right? Now, typically what happens is, one, it will be structured in a completely independent form. That's number one. Number two, the biggest of all challenges is that, silo-based data does not necessarily gives you an adequate reflection, right? On a lot of occasions, especially transactional data, right? While you can have a larger understanding in terms of, what are the consumption patterns and behavioral patterns, and, for example, what influences a consumer, right? Because this is something which is available in a generic form, it's trackable, traceable. But when it comes to transactional information, which essentially helps you, bring in a certain definitiveness and a sensibility, right? Especially from a business environment standpoint, becomes very, very difficult, right? That's either very fractured or that's, limited into a private silo, right? Which is not available for public utilization, right? Now,
absolutely.
I'd love you to explain this to us with a case study in terms of, when you're talking about, creating these data lakes, right? That new organizations come in and plug and play literally, right? And start scaling the operations. What would that entail?
So let's talk about like one of the first use cases that we worked on, and I think the most historic use case when it comes to location data and location intelligence, which is, let's say, as simple as site selection, right? As a company, be it a pharma chain or be it a supermarket chain, you are looking at opening new places, opening new stores, right? And how you traditionally do it is you send, let's say you have an entire field force who goes into these particular locations, captures some information in terms of how many cars do they see on the ground, how many people are walking in, what is the affluence that is there, right? So that is how traditionally it was being performed, and so companies ended up having huge field forces which were very slow moving, and also when it comes to biasness of individuals, right? So essentially data science and insights were driven by human intuition before, right? What we are trying to do is now you can do the same use case. Instead of relying on a field agent to go to that location, you can look at all these external signals when it comes to what kind of people are living there, what kind of transactions are happening there, what segments are people spending in, what is their affluence lifestyle, right? So all of these external data signals can be accessed from the comfort of your office and your laptop, not having to send people, rely on human intuition to drive your intelligence as a company. So from a scale perspective, you can look at pan India, any location in about 30 minutes. You can scour, filter, whatever you want to do, and identify where your right PG lies, right? Which was traditionally done through having a huge field force, having to rely on them to actually drive the business for the entire company. So when insights and intelligence should be top down, they were essentially bottom up, because that's the people on the ground were taking the decisions. Now, what we have done is actually toppled it upside down and tried to make companies actually realize that, and you need to learn, right? Like as a field agent, maybe you have like years of knowledge and years of intuition driven, but that intuition cannot be transferred to someone, that intuition cannot be modeled on or improved, right? But with AI and ML, that is actually possible. So with more people working on it, more people using the solution and giving us feedback, our AI and ML models are actually able to improve what you understand of what a right market is, or where your TG lies and who exactly is your TG. So all of these questions can be answered very differently with the power of AI.
Great point, right? That leads me into a bunch of other questions, right? Now, the fact of the matter is, right, I mean, what we're living possibly right now, and this is a very, very dynamic time, right? What we've seen in the last 2.5 years is completely disrupted and changed the way we consume, right? We've become an information first economy.
Right.
Now, when I say information first economy, essentially is that, when a consumer goes in and interacts digitally, right, understands more about, the product, his requirements, there is a lot more clarity in terms of the purchase, and the purchase happens in a buy now pay later methodology or through a credit card and so on, so forth, right? Now, this is information which is, I mean, there is, this is happening in a very synchronous ecosystem, right? And this is not information which is available outside, right? What happens in an environment like that? I'd love to understand that, right? Because, what you're possibly trying and talking of, right, is feeding into the inefficiencies that exist in the system, right? That we possibly created for the last 100 years, right? Absolutely. But a lot of that is now kind of changing and shaping in a very different way, because we're becoming a more systematic, continuous economy, right? And then the war and the fight is to own those silos, right? and this information becomes the proprietary and more for those businesses of sorts, right?
Absolutely.
Where do you stand in that process?
Right. So if you understand our business, right, as Data Sutram, we are not primary data collectors. We are not generating any data for ourselves. What we allow and the kind of platform that we bring in here is the ability to be able to partner with such silos, such private silos. So let's say as a company, if you are opening up ATMs or if you are giving out credit cards, there is some information that is proprietary to your business and to improve your business. But there's so much parallel information that may have been utilized by a FMCG brand to expand their product portfolio in the right markets, right? So the idea is that as companies in India and being more digital first, we will be creating and collating a lot more data, right? The amount of data that we are capturing today is gonna grow probably tenfolds in a couple of years, right? So, but at the same time, the data is only as valuable as the use that you make out of it, right? So what we are creating as a platform is for any large company to come to us, partner with us and be able to leverage the data and the intelligence that lies within that data for other sectors without hurting their own business, right? So if a POS company comes to me, they need not tell me what their user base is, but by anonymizing the kind of transactions that are happening, I can help an FMCG brand exactly identify where it is most likely to sell a premium product versus a non-premium product, right? So the idea is that it's a ecosystem that we are trying to create here, where any large, small, medium-sized company can contribute in terms of data and be rest assured of the privacy and the anonymity, so that it doesn't hurt them or their consumers, but at the same time allow the entire ecosystem to get benefited out of it. Right. So, and more importantly, I think as an individual company, their data might not be valuable. The value of data comes with scale, right? So it's our job that we partner with enough companies to actually bring scale and coverage and penetration right into the data. Because let's say whenever we look at a data point, we look at coverage, we look at penetration, we look at enrichment. How deep is that data, right? Without two of the three, I don't think any data would be valuable to any industry or any consumer, right? So that is around building more confidence around it itself.
That's a very interesting point that you highlighted, right? And I'm going to come to that point in just a bit. But before that, I want to understand how accurate is this data, right? And what are the lags, for example, when you're pulling in data from so many sources, right? You know, how dynamic is the data typically? What are the kind of lags that you work?
So I think in terms of a company, I think our mandate is that we don't take in any data that has a lag of or latency beyond a month, right? Because that's a refresh cycles with our customers. When it comes to the confidence around the data, I think that's one part that we are actually building a lot of technology and infrastructure around it. Because today, if you look at it, there is no one to actually verify or consolidate or validate that this data is good, right? And it's not feasible for any, like there is no governmental structure, there is no individual company with which vets the confidence of each data point. And that's one of the biggest, I think, lapses of our industry, where it becomes very difficult to translate to our customers that this data is good, right? So that is where we are building internal capabilities, where we are looking at sample sets and using ground truth to actually verify and validate a lot of our data. And when it comes to confidence, personally, I think, and across the geography also, India is a large country, right? You go to Northeast, the digital adoption dips. If you go to a village in Barmer, you might not have network connectivity, right? So all of those things obviously contribute to the confidence of the data itself. But I think in terms of, I think with scale, we have been able to mitigate a lot of those challenges. Because we don't believe in taking data from one company and one partner and extrapolating it to the entire geography. We believe on the opposite sense, to actually build confidence, because that's what's historically been happening. You take a sample set and you look at how well the exit polls do or how well the predictions do, right? All of it goes back to the same challenge of extrapolation, which we are trying to go from the opposite way around, that we won't extrapolate, we will interpolate. So,
right. I think exit polls possibly is not, or should not be the right sort of a metric, right? It's too I think to the point as an exercise, right? I think what we're talking about is a very, very dynamic behavior, especially when you talk about consumer behavior, right? And I think that's essentially what all organizations would be interested in. I, as a business owner, would definitely be interested in as far as my consumers' behavior and shift in the consumers' behavior is concerned.
Absolutely.
Right? Now, Aisik, there's a very interesting point that you highlighted, right? 1 month of a lag when you kind of refresh your data. Now, what is happening is, especially, why am I going back to the 2020 sort of an environment, right? Is because nobody understood, or honestly, we were in denial as an economy. We were in denial, right? When it came to adjusting and adhering to systems that were data smart, data efficient, right? And there was intelligence, right? So we were not really, as an economy, we continue to defer it, right? But I think post 2020, it's become so much more important, right? Now, Aisik, one question that I have is essentially that the behavior of the consumer is completely shifted, right? In the last 2.5 years, right? Today, for example, lending is happening happening on the basis of, for example, say of course, your financial indicators are important, but the weightage of financial indicators of my financial performance kind of come down, right? A lot of my behavioral tendencies are being predicted in terms of my consumption habits, right?
Absolutely.
There are a lot of risks that are, for example, getting adjusted that were not necessarily true before 2020 sort of an environment, right? I, as a consumer today, and I, of course, I'm a slightly slow consumer, right? But the larger consumer in the country, which is just so much more dynamic, right, is getting influenced by a lot of content and a lot of information, knowledge which is flowing into the economy, right? What that essentially means is that what is true for me as a consumer today might not stand relevant tomorrow, right? Fads are going to fly faster. My preference are going to change order and shift order, right? How complicated, are the models sharp and smart enough to adjust to a lot of this, right? Because influence is something which is very difficult to track, right? How I perceive that information is very difficult to capture, right? That's only possible in a transactional mindset, but the transactional mindset might not be consistent, right? How big is that as a problem? Do you see in the Indian consumer? There is a homogeneity which is coming, right?
Right.
I think the homogeneity is going to kill the cultural complexity that we had as a country, right? We're becoming one large nation, but a very aggressive, agile, active, aspirationally sharp, and influencer-led economy, right? What's your sense of this, right? How relevant are the models going to be going forward?
So I think one of the post-COVID, I think throughout the COVID period, one of our biggest efforts went into risk for the same particular reason, right? So when we are looking at risk scores, when we are looking at credit scores, when we are looking at historical ways of judging credit worthiness when it comes to a consumer, all the companies failed during COVID because no one was expecting the kind of industry level shifts that were happening. There was an entire depression when it comes to consumer markets, retail markets, right? So those are the environmental factors that is actually possible to be captured with the kind of data that we are providing today, right? So because let's say we could directly correlate how likely was a business to pay back his EMI that month with the amount of footfall that he was getting, because the areas under lockdown, the areas that were sparsely populated had no means of generating the liquidity that was needed for them to pay back EMI. So I think that's where actually people had the real push to actually look at these alternate data and environmental data factors when it comes to understanding risk in an industry, in a geography, in a location, right? Sure. So that was a very integral part of our journey within the BFSI space, where and even today, where our biggest focus is to be able to understand. So people look at credit worthiness in terms of intent, in terms of capacity, in terms of ability to repay, right? So each and every one of these three factors has a geographical and an alternate data play for it, and which is where we want to come up with our geo-risk scores, with our intent scores when it comes to consumers and businesses in a geography. And I think that will show relevance going into the future, because at the end of the day, we right now are talking of inclusivity. We are talking about being underserved, working in the underserved market. So areas where people would be new to credit, people would not have the kind of banking history that you need for a proper risk analysis for a lender, right? So alternate data in terms of their social media behavior, in terms of their mobile behavior, in terms of their transactional behavior becomes all the more important going into these new segments.
Aisik, is it fair to say that this is possibly phase one of your journey, right? Because kind of data that we're talking about, I think is more macro data. I think you're still not talking about interoperability, interfunctional, relations between certain sets that are working, right? So,
Right.
I mean, when you talk about a slightly more evolved system, right? You're talking about 4 or 5 different, parameters which are kind of coming in and interacting with each other, right? Which are internal to a model. And then there is a mega model that kind of emerges in the process, right? What you're
Right.
possibly highlighting is a more macro sort of a this thing, which
No,
could
I think,
sort of.
yeah. So the way that we look at it is, I think it's not macro because of the granularity in which this data is available,
Sure.
right? When I'm looking at footfall, I'm not looking at footfall of a pin code or a state. I'm looking at footfall at a particular merchant. And that is the kind of granularity that we can achieve with the alternate data that we capture. Because at the end of the day, uh, any data that we are capturing. So when I talked about how we evaluate a data source, right? One of the
Sure.
points was the confidence in terms of accuracy of the data, right? So any transactional data that has been captured and is not relevant beyond 100 to 200 meters, that's not of any value to business or a consumer. So when we look at data and we provide data to our customers, that's normally at least a 50-meter granularity or a 100-meter granularity, right?
Interesting.
And yeah, so that helps us actually tone it down to the exact business that we are giving out the loan to, or the exact store that we want to probably open, right?
Ashik, I'd love you to explain this to me a little deeper, right? Now, assuming there are 2 stores in a same mall, right, which has, say, a very high footfall, right? There is one store which is doing X, and then there's another store which is doing 3X, right? Now, how do you differentiate, right? Because at a macro, a lot of this data is going to look similar, right?
Right.
Right. Assuming that the two businesses are the same category, they're doing the same thing, right? How do you differentiate between, what's right and what's wrong? Or
Right.
not
So
right? I mean, that's a wrong question, right? That's wrongly put in the sense that right or wrong, right? But how do you differentiate between what's working, what's not working?
So in terms of so obviously not all of the data is going to have vertical accuracy, right? But it is possible with GPS signals and the location data to understand the vertical possibility in terms of which float they are on, and that's where the tech of our partners in their data capture is going today in terms of giving us greater granularity in terms of the signals, right?
Mm-hmm.
The way we look at it is we are looking at overall the kind of footfall that the mall is getting, the kind of spending that the mall is getting, and what category are people coming in the mall to spend for, right? That is so mixing the sources together is what gives you the right picture, right? If you look at something like spending, it will probably look the same. If you look at footfall, it probably will look the same for similar stores in the mall. But at the same time, when you're mixing all of these signals together, that's where you can possibly differentiate one from the other, right? Because there are things like the store level accuracy in terms of footfall can help you differentiate, but probably transactions, since we are anonymizing at a location level, will not be able to differentiate, but the category spends will. So I think it's at the end of the day, the story is to take it more granular. Today we limit ourselves to kind of 50-meter granularity, because that is where a lot of it makes sense for consumers, right? When they are trying to understand one particular business, right? They have their historical sales records, they have their historical bank records, things like that. What they are rather trying to understand is how is the industry trends influencing, what will the industry trends be in the market in the coming months? Do I have to send the guy to collect that data, for collect the money the guy owes me for this month or not? So a lot of those has environmental factors coming in.
I'd love to understand, what's the impact that you've been able to create, right? What you're doing is very relevant, right? But this is something which has happened in the past, right? And the case in point is, assuming I'm a retail player, right, who's looking to establish a certain shop, for example, in a mall, right, a high street mall. There have been mechanics of collecting data, right? There have been mechanics of kind of building models, analyzing purchases, doing predictives on the possible outcome, right? That I could possibly have, right? There's a lot of that which just existed, right? Fortunately, unfortunately, that was possibly in an offline format, right? Or that was in a physically driven format, right? Something that you alluded to in your points that you highlighted, right? What is the kind of impact that you've been able to create, right? With say this dynamism that you're bringing, right? Say third time inputs and awareness that you're bringing, right? What's the kind of impact that you've been able to create for businesses vis-a-vis earlier, say archaic ways of doing this analysis?
So I think two forms. I think when we look at impact, right? One is, let's say I am an established business and I've been doing that in an
Sure.
offline format, in a notepad pen
Mhm.
format, right?
Sure.
What we've been able to do for them is scale, right? So with one of our customers who had a very aggressive plan to open 100 stores in 100 days, they've been
Sure.
able to achieve that because of us, because they could leverage the data just as quickly, run multiple evaluations of multiple locations parallelly, right, to be able to do that. And even for, let's say, a company that didn't have any data, right, let's say a customer in the paper industry, right, wanted to understand, they didn't have any retail level what demand data, they had distributor level sellout data, which is not something that's as granular or something as accurate, because a lot of the data is purely from push and not from pull, right? So
Right.
it doesn't show you the right picture. They were able to go from there to actually have a demand sensing, digital demand sensing exercise, and be able to allocate the right resources, help their distributors capture the right markets through the data that we can. So I think having that journey of 0 to 1 in terms of digital literacy and digital impact, right, so quickly is what we've been able to provide them with.
And Ashik, what's been the sustainability, right? So of the actions that they've taken basis your inputs, right, and directions. What's been the outcome, right? Have these locations, for example, that they've identified, right? How sustainable has these locations been, or is that something that you do not track as of
So
now?
yeah, so I think as the core product of Data Sutram is pure play the consumer behavior insights, the
Sure.
data, right? But at times, obviously, with B2B customers, we are providing them with the last mile, which is in terms of where to open the store, let's say, as the model. So the
Mhm.
function of where the store is being opened is a function of the model and the data itself, right?
Mhm.
So when it comes to confidence, that those are the two factors that go into the picture. So with the kind of stores that we have opened, the customers have seen very low. So their biggest challenge is also closing stores. It's not about just opening stores.
Right.
Opening stores in the right location that you wouldn't have to close 3 months down the line and lose your entire opportunity cost, right? That was the exact use case that they took us on for. So
Mhm.
today, not only have they not have to close the stores that they are open to the platform, they are also using our platform and our data to actually relocate some of the stores that we have potentially told them is not the right fit based on the kind of model outputs that we have gotten, right? So that is the kind of stability going into the future. And because these are ML and AI models, at the end of the day, they will get better with time, they will get better with more data. So even if there was one wrong decision that was taken place, they have that has gone back into the model as feedback to actually train it. So
Interesting.
that is the kind of iterative development that allows them to actually have greater confidence with time.
Super, super. Ashik, I think fortunately, unfortunately, this conversation essentially got a little skewed towards real estate, right? And for example,
Right.
stores and locations, right? But what are some of the other case studies? I'd love you to highlight some of them
Yeah, I
that
think,
you've
yeah.
been working on.
So I think that's the real estate and the retail where we started our journey. But right now, for the last year and a half, is where our most focus has been on the BFSI segment. When it comes to, let's say, something as simple as merchant acquisition, that
Sure.
becomes very difficult in a country like India because of the kind of data that is being collected against them, right?
Sure.
In terms of accuracy of the location, in terms of actual verification, right? Even through COVID, there have been thousands of businesses that have closed down or changed or things like that. That
Sure.
those kind of feedbacks don't go into the digital listicles that are out there in the world, right? So we've been a huge partner at play, and also when it comes to knowing more about the business, right? As a POS company, you're not just looking to acquire more merchants; you are looking to acquire merchants that will give back value to you, right? So the data, merchant data as itself does is not the game changer. What is a game changer is our ability to actually enrich that merchant with the kind of footfall he's getting, with the kind of transactions that are happening, and the kind of people that are coming into that store, right? So from a payment companies front, we have walked across, I think, almost all the payment companies that are there, help them with the kind of resources they need on ground, actually helped the people on ground to get to the store, identify, have the right data to create beats, right? So our entire effort has gone on to merchant acquisition. And beyond that, what we have worked with a lot of our NBFC partner is create something called a geo risk score, right? Which goes beyond the history of the individual merchant. It looks into the industry trends, it looks into the kind of footfall it has to actually tell you on a regular month-on-month basis the kind of health of the merchant itself, which might allow you to preemptively understand collections, preemptively understand default, right? Or for a new N2C customer who has no banking history or financial backing to actually get a loan from you. We are allowing lenders like that to be able to give out the loan to the right merchants without taking on too much risks, right? So that's kind of the spaces that we have been working on the BFSI part.
Ashik, that's an interesting position for yourself, right? But I'm tempted to ask, do you see yourself as a guiding light, or do you, you know, you in your, at least in your vision, right? You want to be positioned as a partner, right? Basis which they can take these calls, right? To me,
Right.
a lot of this is already happening, right? In some form or the other. It's possibly it's not as structured, right? It's already happening, which also means that you could highlight a little in terms of your competence, right, on this. But to me, it seems to be that additional point in my assessment sheet, right, where I'm taking these details and inputs from data Sutram, but might not be my core, decision making.
Absolutely. And I think
Not
what
the
we are,
dependence.
yeah, we are here to actually empower these companies with data to be able to take the right decisions. We
So,
are not a last mile or service consulting company. We actually partner with a lot of consulting companies to actually give the last mile solutions to these clients. But at the end of the day, we have to, given the situation that we are in India, where a lot of these companies are building their data science teams, are building their data science capabilities. We have at times helped customers with last mile solution, but at the end of the day, we are an alternate data platform where anyone can come in and just pull in the data sources, and we are actually building our IP and our strength in terms of the quality of the data, being able to verify the data, being able to uh, give you deeper insights in geographies that are untapped, right? So that's where we will as a company grow. But today, yeah, we do help our customers with taking decisions through our data, because at the end of the day, a business will only value that the insights that they are getting from it.
interesting. Ashik, we've continued to talk about, a lot of nuances around, the veracity of data, models, right? All of that. Would love to understand, what are some of the other challenges, right? India is a difficult market, many stakeholders, bureaucratic mindset. We continue to push, right? Not very, very high on, spending monies, right? Cost is always a concern.
So
Uh, how has that been, right? What are some of the challenges that you and your team have continued to come across, and possibly, have built your hacks around it, right? And I'm sure that can help many other people who are in
yeah,
enterprise.
I think like when you're coming up with the idea of using data to take decisions has been a very old story, right? But it for in terms of the segment that we have come up with was kind of novel in India. Not too
Right.
many data players, and actually, our investors always told us how data companies don't work out in India, but they believed in us to be able to change that, right? So one of the, I think, first things that we learned is to be able to educate our audience, because at the end of the day, the Indian market, no matter if he is the CEO or the CTO or the CIO, unless they understand what you're trying to do, they would never have faith in you and believe in your solution. So a lot of the effort when it comes to more conservative businesses have gone on to building confidence through information exchange, through helping them understand how this works, right,
Right.
in a very simplified fashion, right? So that was one of the first things, and that took quite a bit of time, and that's where we started to go towards BFSI segment as well, because that was a segment which was a lot more data savvy. They could take in and integrate data very quickly, right? And the other, I think, challenge when you're working as a B2B company, I think, is integration, right? So we've then leveraged different forms of delivery. Like you can take our platform, you can take our API, you can take our SDK, right? Because at the end of the day, every company has they are always strung for resources when it comes to technology and integration. So that always takes a backseat. So we try to make it as simple and as easy as possible for you to consume the data, because that's where the real piece of the pie lies, right? So yeah, I think a lot of learning and unlearning for us. And I think what helped was the fact that this was a first time venture and we didn't actually understand the space, but we could empathize with our customers and actually help it in terms of what they would understand and what they would relate to. So
no, Ashik, that's an incredible feat, right? I think this is an absolutely crazy market, right? Right, and there is nothing right or wrong, right? I think your ability to continue to make that emphasis, right, and possibly become that partner, right? I think that partnership oriented approach is very very important. And, I think when it comes to an environment like the one you possibly dealing in, right? And it always continues to get questioned, right? I think the shift is always painful, but essentially, my sense is I think what has happened in the last 2.5 years, right? I think is I think businesses have no choice. Leadership has no choice but to shift, right? I think that's Ashik, towards the end of our conversation, would love to understand what are the next 2.5 years like, right? For you, I would have loved to ask you a 5-year question, but I think they're two dynamic times. I think that also gives us an opportunity to come back and revisit what we discussed in this conversation, right? What are the next 2 years like?
Yeah, and I think we ourselves are looking at 2 years at a time only, given the situation that we are in. So yeah, for us, I think the idea is the data that we are creating is sector agnostic at the end of the day, right? We are looking at consumer behavior insights. We are looking at capacity around consumers, what they are doing, how they are behaving. So one important aspect is obviously scale, how we can scale it to other sectors that are coming up, and I think there is application in each and every sector that is there. So the idea is to prioritize the right sectors, identify things like EV, things like FMCG, manufacturing, right? Areas which have largely been underserved when it comes to data and digitization. So that's one aspect, and the other aspect is obviously scaling similar use cases, the kind of use cases we have built out in the BFSI segment, which are a lot more mature, taking them to the world when it comes to Southeast Asia or Europe, right? So that's been that's on our minds when it comes to our future plans. But obviously, I think if the story started in India, we would want to obviously consolidate our position in India, build a lot more data points, data sources, and maybe probably help the government or the industry itself in setting up some framework and some structures to be able to make this entire story a lot more streamlined and for a lot more inclusive for everyone.
Phenomenal. Ashik, last question in this conversation, slightly more cliched, right? But I love to end my conversation at this point, right? I think every founder has a very unique journey, right? I think you and your, the founding team, right? You chose to get out of the college and step out of the college and get into something which is, say, as for example, which is largely been considered as a big boys game, right? And this club never wanted to change, right? I think you're challenging the normal. A lot of such kids out of college want to challenge the normal, right? They don't necessarily get the right motivation, support, guidance, right? It is a very, very difficult path, right? When you worked, you have a basic understanding of certain nuances, right? Certain processes, so on. If you were to give that advice to many of these these aspiring entrepreneurs, right, out of colleges, what would that be? I'd love you to end this conversation at that.
Right. So I think we've been phenomenally lucky to be surrounded by the kind of people we were. Like you said, being right out of college, having the confidence of so many people, so many stalwarts in the space, for them to have the confidence that we will be able to do what we are saying we will, right? So I think starting off, I think you have to come up with a clean slate. Just think that you are the sponge and take in everything that they are giving you, but at the same time not losing your own personality, right? Like a lot of times we have being able to take the right advice and the right judgment is also a very important thing to learn, right? So I think as simple as that, I think for us it was about surrounding ourselves with the right people, taking everything a step at a time, not thinking too far down, because you don't know what you will see. So yeah.
Played by the ear, played by the ear. Ashik, this is an absolutely spectacular conversation. Thank you so much for doing that, right? I think, one thing that has stood out in this conversation, and I think which is the beauty of what you're possibly doing, is that, you are cracking through those, institutionalized mindsets, right? Which have largely been at play when it comes to, businesses taking decisions, right? I think in an environment like the one we are in, as dynamic as it is, I think it requires a lot of agility, right? Possibly guerrilla warfare stands closer to the mindset that is required,
Yeah.
right? I think, and not an institutionalized mindset, right? You cannot have a, a very horizontal sort of a strategy when it comes to business dynamics, right? I think you have to continue to devise a lot of micro strategies, right, for the complexity that India offers, right? While we are becoming a homogeneous market, while there is a tendency of us, consuming a certain common way, but I think the fact of the matter is that the influence, from multiple sources will continue to change the consumer's behavior, right? And that requires for organizations to become so much more agile, right? And that is something that you're empowering and enabling these organizations with, right? In a market which is as connected as we are, in a market which is as transparent as we are, I think this is something which is, the most powerful piece in the hands of decision makers. This enables them, empowers them to build themselves a bigger war chest, right? By catering the customer in the right way at the right spot. That is just so much more important in many ways, right? And of course, the fintech ecosystem and everything kind of leverages from this definitiveness that you bring into the game. And that's spectacular. We wish you all the very best, Ashik, to you and the entire team. You're doing a spectacular job. Look forward to having you with us much sooner. Thank you for doing this.
Thanks a lot, Ashu. I had a great time talking to you, and hopefully that will go to a larger audience, and we'll have a lot more visibility when it comes to data and insights.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.